Good morning, members of Parliament, support staff, radio listeners, TV viewers, those viewing via social media, and members of the media. Welcome to this continuation meeting of the Central Committee meeting number 27 of today, April 22nd, 2022. I would like to give a special welcome to Mr. Dennis Richardson and Ms. Natalie Tackling. We have established a quorum of 4 members. Please let's four factions. Please let's stand for a moment of silence. I have received notice of absence from MP William Marlin and a notice of lateness from MP Peterson. Is there any member of Parliament that wishes to have the floor for notifications? I see no need. Then we move on to the agenda point for this meeting, which is the presentation by experts regarding the pros and cons of the draft consensus, Kingdom Law, Caribbean Reform and Development Agency. This can be found under IS 547, Parliamentary Year 2021-22, dated February 11, 2022. We go over to the agenda point. Parliament received the draft Kingdom Law, Caribbean Reform and Development Agency on February 11, 2022. This document, as stated before, is registered under IS 547 and can be found under P Drive. The Committee of Kingdom Affairs and Interparliamentary Relations decided in this meeting of March 16, 2022 to invite the Prime Minister to a closed-door technical briefing, which would be followed by a Central Committee meeting with the Prime Minister regarding the Coho. These meetings have been held. The CCARE Committee also proposed a list of experts to be invited to give their take on the pros and the cons of the draft Coho Kingdom Law in the Central Committee meeting of Parliament. It is good to note that today's meeting is a continuation of the meeting which started in April 2022, with the presence of Professor Gerhard Hogers, and after a presentation by Mr. Hogers and deliberation with members of Parliament, the meeting was then adjourned. Today, former Lieutenant Governor of St. Martin and former Minister of Justice, Mr. Dennis Richardson, and Attorney at Law, Ms. Natalie Tackling, are present to share their take on the pros and cons of the draft consensus Kingdom Law Coho, as presented by the Kingdom Government. And at this time, I would first like to give the floor to Ms. Tackling for her opening remarks and presentation. Ms. Tackling, you have the floor.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here this morning. I think I wanted to start with that. I've prepared a short presentation, and I'll kind of go through what I'm planning to touch on this morning. So this is kind of the table of contents for today. We'll do an introduction, followed by the backgrounds and objectives of the Coho Kingdom Law, the main features of the Coho Kingdom Law, and then we'll touch a bit on the advice from the Raad van State, along with the response by the Kingdom Government to that. And then I'll pay some more attention to ownership and commitment, and then finally end with a conclusion. So I think to kind of get straight into the introduction, a lot of attention, I think, has already been paid to the topic of autonomy and the relationship between the Coho and the CFT, or the Coho and the national governments, Coho and Parliament. You know, I looked at presentations that were given in Curacao, debates that were had, advices from the different councils of advice within the different countries, and I think a lot of attention has been paid to that already. And where I want to focus today is more on the practical execution and the efficacy of the Coho and how we can use that to our advantage. And in that sense, also stand still by a couple of the amendments that have been made in the current draft as a result of the advice from the Raad van State, and look at, you know, where might be kind of the sticking points in practice, or where are the things that maybe as a parliament going into IPCO or going into the next steps or the next phase of this, where maybe our attention might be better paid or we might give better mind to. All right, so I see it doesn't completely fit up here, but the background and the objectives of the Kingdom Law. So as we know, the idea was, liquidity support after, as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. Also the idea here is to implement necessary reforms of an administrative nature to achieve sustainable public finances and also strengthen the resilience of the economies of the different countries. In order to achieve these goals, the Coho has two tasks, which have kind of been changed. I think we noticed from the draft before, but we'll go into that later. But essentially, there's two tasks that the Coho has in order to achieve these objectives, and they're to support the development and implementation of reforms by bodies/entities within the different countries, and also then to monitor. So it's a support task and a monitoring task. All right, then, of course, there's a couple of main features and things that are provided a legal basis in the Kingdom Act. And the first one is the institution of the Coho as an entity under Dutch law. This is found in Article 2. This is also different than what we saw before. Before we saw that the Coho was a ZBO, a zelfstandig bestuursorgaan, and we saw that it had legal personality. I'll touch on why this was changed later as well. A legal basis is also created for the country packages. The authority of the Coho is defined. Also, the way that the Coho provides support through making financial resources available by providing expertise and implementation capacity, and then also the doorlichting, or in English we say assessing government and public enterprises, and also granting subsidies to citizens and legal entities. Finally, of course, there's also a task for the supervision, which I mentioned earlier, and then also we are given a legal basis for the plans of approach. And I noticed what is missing here is also the implementation agendas. And these are important, I think, in what I'd like to discuss today. All right, so the Raad van State issued a fairly critical advice to the initial Coho draft. And, you know, I think there were a lot of sharp edges in there. And one of the points I translated out of the advice is basically this one here. It says the division does not consider it advisable to compensate for the country's lack of implementation power by making Coho jointly responsible for drawing up and implementing plans of approach. This does not strengthen the implementation powers of the country, weakens their commitment and personal responsibility, and makes it more difficult to phase out the scheme. It must therefore be doubted whether with the setup currently chosen, it can reasonably be expected that the reform program will lead to success in the short and long term. I think a lot of the changes that we have seen in the current draft all come from, I think, really from this. And a lot of it has to do with that sense, creating more ownership, creating more, you know, sense of responsibility from the countries. Also that implementation, where we saw a lot of powers that the Coho had previously, where it came to basically they were the ones that were deciding on the implementation agendas. They were the ones establishing the plans of approach. And we see a change and a shift from that. And this following quote is from the NADA report, which is the response to, from the State Secretary to the Raad van State. And I'll go into some of these changes, but in the view of the Kingdom government, the changes that they've made now have strengthened the country's ownership and responsibility for the reforms. In the implementation agenda, the countries make agreements with the Coho and about the concrete goals and results of the reforms to be achieved. The elaboration and implementation thereof are the responsibility of the countries themselves. So the Coho's activities are limited to supporting and monitoring, which we saw as those two tasks. So then the question becomes, you know, has there really been an increase in ownership and commitment? And that's, you know, what I'd like to debate and discuss with you all today. So from that perspective, then, what has really changed? And we've seen a couple things. One is the roles in setting the implementation agenda and the plans of approach, which I'll get into a bit. We've also seen these amended tasks of the Coho, the enhanced financial supervision, which was very controversial. That was removed from the current draft. And then also we've seen that whether we can consider this strengthened, I wanted to put apostrophes there, but we have seen that there's been more tools given to Parliament, so really we should really strengthen, and I think that'll be a point of discussion today if we feel that way. But so this relationship between the Coho and the Parliament has been, you know, strengthened to a certain extent. And what I wanted to add here as well, I realized that I forgot, and I'll touch on that though, is the manner in which the Kingdom government has now proposed to appoint members of the Coho. And I think that that's something that the islands still feel strongly about, and I'd like to give some attention to that in a bit. So as part of the provision of liquidity support, the Netherlands concluded a series of agreements with Aruba, Curaçao, and St. Martin on necessary reforms around July 2020. The agreed upon projects, programs, and measures have been broadly elaborated upon in the so-called country packages, in which structural reforms are central on the one hand, and concrete measures are included that support the necessary reforms on the other. The Coho will support and monitor the implementation of this and the development. The envisaged structural reforms and concrete measures included in the country package are aimed at making the economy resilient, restoring sound public finances, improving social security, healthcare, and education, and strengthening the rule of law. The country package in that sense forms a coherent program. Although prioritization is desirable or necessary in the implementation, and there are differences in the size and the effects of the measures, an integrated approach, I think, is necessary. Integrated implementation of the program is also important in order to achieve balanced socioeconomic effects. For example, labor market reform should be viewed and implemented in conjunction with social security reform, improvements in education, tackling poverty, tackling the informal economy. Right now, I think we see also, I've had the privilege of being able to work in some research projects within the country packages, and we're currently carrying out research on different sectors. And some of the things I think that we noticed speaking to stakeholders is how difficult it is to see these separate packages as separate and distinct. You know, how do you talk about the investment climate and entrepreneurship without talking about tax reform? So, and in that sense, I think that where there lies kind of the effectiveness and the execution of the program is how do we ensure that all these things are in sync and that we're actually doing this in the proper manner. So for many of the reforms mentioned in the country package, it's clear why they're necessary and what the intended objectives are. But additional exploration or elaboration may be necessary in order to get a clear picture of the problem, the possible solutions, the coherence, and the desired approach. So this is then the further specification and prioritization of the country packages is said to be periodically incorporated into these implementation agendas and plans of approach. The implementation agendas are jointly established periodically by the Coho and in anticipation of the Coho currently by the Minister of the State Secretary of BZK along with the Prime Minister of each country. And the countries can further elaborate the implementation agendas in so-called plans of approach. A plan of approach requires the approval by the Coho, and it must respect the frameworks laid down in the country package and the implementation agenda. There's a concrete elaboration of the various projects, programs, and measures in milestones, critical performance indicators, budget, and also a risk assessment. These have also been lined out kind of in the law in terms of what needs to be in the plan of approach. Agreements on how exactly the cooperation between the countries on the relevant measures will be structured and what support will be provided from the Netherlands are also recorded in the plan of approach. The necessary structural reforms are what are central in the country package. This is elaborated upon in 8 themes, and the 8 themes are the same for all the countries. The details and agreements within the themes depend on the needs of the individual countries. Each country, of course, has its own specific culture and developments, which are expressed in the tailor-made agreements in the implementation agenda. The countries themselves then draw up a plan of action tailored to their specific situation and needs and are supposed to implement these themselves. The elucidation or the explanatory notes to the Kingdom Act state that this structure that they've proposed does justice to the individual responsibility of the countries and enables the countries to strengthen their implementation power. I'm not sure that I agree with this statement. While on paper it seems plausible, I question whether this result is achieved in practice. And I think looking very practically at this, what I miss, I think, up to now is kind of this clear link to the problem itself. I think after the question has to be, why have we failed in implementing reforms thus far? And reading the explanatory notes to this law, it seems that that's insufficiently explored or insufficiently elaborated upon. You know, there's statements made about, you know, that we need more flexibility in our labor market, or that we need more incentives for entrepreneurship, and those are things that are currently being researched within the country packages, right? The validity of these statements and how recommendations can be made. The problem, I think, is looking at how did we get here? And was it a lack of, we do talk about this lack of implementation capacity within the islands. And I do have the fear in the current structure, at least, that that we're not sufficiently addressing that problem. So in that sense, that the Coho is, or the draft law that we have in front of us, that we're addressing the symptoms in terms of, well, we have all these issues. But the question is, what is the root of the problem, and are we really curing that? And I think it's a wonderful addition that we're getting all this support from the Netherlands, but how do we ensure that once the Coho isn't there anymore in 6 years, that St. Martin is able to stand on its own and is able to continue on this path of putting through reforms, of making the necessary amendments in the law? Pre-10-10-10, we went from a place where we had, a central government within Curaçao that had all the capacity. We moved to St. Martin, where then kind of this civil service apparatus is lacking because we have to build this all up on our own. Now, we're in a situation where we are getting the assistance we need, both, in terms of the expertise, in terms of the budgetary needs. But how do we fill that capacity problem once that capacity is taken away again? And are we left then, with a void once more? So I think that today, I think the point I wanted to bring across was, how can we constructively, as a country, along with the Netherlands, you as a parliament, in your further discussions, look at how can we take the right measures or take the right steps in order to ensure that as a country that we are self-sufficient at the end of this, because that should be the goal. And in assessing that, we also need to realize what the problem actually is, what is the root of the problem, and not just addressing the symptoms, but really getting to a cure itself. And I think that takes a lot of introspection, but I think that we can get there. And if we pay less attention too much to the discussions about autonomy and things like that, and focus more on what we can actually achieve out of this. As they say in Dutch, je voordeel eruit halen. So these are, I think, kind of the main points that I wanted to discuss here. And again, if we look at the changes, a lot of the sharp edges have been taken out of the law. And I think that from a legislative perspective, looking at the advice of the Raad van State, looking at the new draft and the NADA report, a lot of it has been taken out. I think it's much more, to borrow your word, Mr. Richardson, it's a lot more palatable, the current draft. That being said, there was another point here that I wanted to, I did mention that I had forgot to put on my slide here, the appointment of the members. I think I made a note of this. There were comments from the different countries in which they had proposed to have, I think, a similar structure of appointment of members to the CFT, where there would be 5 members, I believe one of the countries had proposed, and then you would have representatives specifically of each country on the Coho. That wasn't accepted by the Kingdom government, and instead they've chosen for a setup where 2 members have to have an affinity with the Caribbean islands, and then a 3rd member doesn't necessarily have to have that affinity, and they've instead chosen to focus on expertise. I think it's debatable. I'm not sure that I'm completely convinced by the argument that was presented in that respect. I don't necessarily see an issue with having 5 members or having people there as a representative. I think it's slightly contradictory in the sense where the argument is that every island is distinct and different. And so I think an affinity with Curaçao or Aruba doesn't necessarily mean an affinity with St. Martin, or vice versa. So I'm not sure how we can, I don't know how much room there is to negotiate that, but it was one of the things that I found a bit telling, and that I felt the need to remark on, that I wasn't totally convinced by the argumentation brought forward in the NADA report. And I believe it's one that the islands still feel quite seriously about, to have different representation. All right. So I think I already kind of started going into my conclusion. I think to kind of put this all together, Many of the reforms of the Coho need to be properly reviewed and studied in terms of the feasibility in the local context. So not just the applicability, but also the economic and the social impact of what we're doing. And by no means, I think we all agree in here today that reform is necessary. And, not Mr. Emmanuel, apparently he does not agree with me that reforms are necessary. But I'm curious to hear his comments in a bit, once I wrap up. But I think that what we need to really focus on is these should be, reforms for us by us. And there needs to be ownership. And ownership and commitment are crucial for the success of the Coho and the goal that it pursues. So this is the only way to achieve fruitful cooperation and achieve sustainable results that will last even after the program has ended. In recent decades, the implementation power and the lack of capacity on the island has been problematic in the implementation and the execution of various measures. We can ask ourselves why for years we've had kind of recurring comments from the CFT, from whoever else, kind of like looking down on us, or anybody that's talking about the prison or our justice system as to, why we aren't doing what we do or what we should be doing. And it almost always comes back to either a lack of funding but mostly just a lack of capacity and a lack of implementation capacity. And the question is whether we're really solving that through the Coho. And part of my point too that I wanted to make about these implementation agendas and plans of approach, and why I made the statement that I didn't necessarily agree that this gives more ownership, it feels at the same time like we're just kind of going through the movements. And I wonder how much we really own and feel that these are our reforms and the things that we want. And I don't have the answer for you today as to how we can solve this, and I wish I did. But I do think that we need to focus more on how, as a country, we can not just kind of go along to get along, but how we can really take initiative in this and find a way to really own these reforms, because I think that's the only way we're going to really make them stick. And until I think we really own it, we're gonna, it will continuously be in this situation where St. Martin is constantly in need of handouts, and there's always gonna be strings attached. And we want to be able to gain our independence from that need and be able to stand on our own 2 feet. So in conclusion, for me, it's just, ownership and commitment. And I'm curious to discuss with you today and hear your thoughts on how we can bolster that. How can we improve on that? Not necessarily if we're still getting all the technical assistance in order to establish plans of approach, then even though on paper it says that we are the ones that establish them, we're not really establishing them. We're not really taking ownership. We don't really feel like it's ours. So how do we look at improving on that element in order to make the Coho truly effective? Because there are opportunities here. So how do we use those in our best interest? I thank you for your attention so far. That was it for my initial thoughts, and I look forward to your questions. And I think it'll just be we'll just kind of go back and forth, right? Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Ms. Tacklin, for your presentation and comments. Members of Parliament, I turn to you to see if anyone has any questions, suggestions. I see MP Westcott Williams. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Good morning to you. Good morning to our Secretary General colleagues. Good morning. Good morning, St. Martin, and of course, good morning and a word of welcome to our guests here this morning, Mr. Dennis Richardson and Miss Natalie Tacklin. Madam Chair Lady, last night, and I was just confirming whether Garrick received it, I send my observations that I have been making over the course of weeks, some months even, and I say this to say that if I didn't know better, one would have thought that I had some insight into the notes made by Ms. Tacklin. And of course, that's not the case. But so I don't have any questions really, because the summarized issues as mentioned are exactly what I have noted and what I have been saying from day one. So I too now, rather than rehashing what I have been saying over the course of the past weeks and months, think that we should focus on where do we really go from here. And from day one, with the best will in the world, understanding our civil service in terms of its capacity to deal with matters such as this. You would recall that my comments to the Prime Minister was that we do not own this process. And making that statement makes me conclude that because of that, buy into the process, is going to be very, very difficult. I hope that the feeling that exists in governmental circles that there is room for discussion, I hope that that is really so. Not only in trying to make something out of what is on the table now, but really looking at where we got started with this. And I believe that we started on the wrong footing and for the wrong reasons. So while indeed some changes have been made, they do not address the fundamental issues here. The matter, and I keep repeating this, of the role of Parliament. Of course, I took note of how it has been changed. But when you look at the process to reach to where the Parliament can ask, mind you, can ask for information to be provided by the Coho organization, by the time we are that far, we are before a fait accompli in terms of the implementation, the control, etc., etc. So, Madam Chair Lady, I think this Parliament should really focus on understanding why it is on the table, what is our proposal moving forward with the understanding of where we're at. I believe, and I've stated it in the paper presented, that the construct of a consensus kingdom law is, in this case, being misused. And I think that's something that we got to continue to hammer on. One, and we need to insist that consensus, since it is a consensus kingdom law, consensus that is required all along the process, that consensus is there. This is where we will have the opening to really give our input and talk about solutions for what is before us. I also believe, and the matter of, and that's why I made my opening statement somewhat in a joke with respect to Ms. Stacklin's notes, the matter of the cohesion of these projects and programs. And I think that we should seriously consider looking at tying the national development vision that has been in the make for so long, yet we can't get it to be the pronounced national plan for St. Martin, but nevertheless, that in conjunction with the sustainable development goals is what we should be lobbying for the future picture and path of St. Martin to contain. Why do I tie it into the sustainable development goals? Because these are measures tailored to the local situation, but that have international recognition. The Netherlands has been, at the forefront of dealing with their development from the perspective of the social development goals. And we should do the same. Those are the measures that we should be listing. Again, we can't do all of the sustainable development goals in the same pace, in the same context that bigger countries, but we can adjust them according to the way that we can move forward according to our progress. And again, it is what everyone understands it to be. And I think that those type of indicators are what are lacking in this approach with country package implementation agenda and execution agenda. Measures pointing towards alleviation of poverty, for example, healthcare, and I mean, I could go on and on. So I really think that we need to look for that opening that the consensus requires. If it's going to be consensus, then you have to respect our part in it and look at goals that we can understand, not only for ourselves in terms of its progress, but also internationally recognized as such. The question about other reform programs is one that I have placed right here in Parliament and have asked the same question. Have we asked why other reform programs have failed or have not succeeded sufficiently? Before the whole Coho thing, and I mentioned it, there was the Groei Accord of Curaçao. Progress reports on this accord have been made and are there. And when you look at it, I asked myself, that was not a consensus Rijkswet, but the same kind of measuring tools and instruments were part of it. The localness of the board, couleur locale, as I like to call it, that was built in there. Why was that cut off to then throw this blanket country package type of a scheme over all of the countries? It came about at a wrong time on the wrong footing, and I think those are the issues. The issues as a result thereof are what we are dealing with today. So I don't think we should continue to try to see if we could make something out of what is there, but rather acknowledge from where we come, what are the reasons for it, and how we move forward. And how I think that we should is what I have just put forward. So I say all of that to thank Ms. Tackling for her insights and deliberations on this matter. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Westcott Williams. Next on the speakers list, we have MP George Pantaflet. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to the Chair, my colleagues in Parliament, honorable guests, Ms. Tackling and Mr. Dennis Richardson, former Lieutenant Governor, Minister of Justice, those that are viewing and listening to this meeting. Madam Chair, let me thank Ms. Tackling for her presentation. I couldn't find any holes in it. I agree with you 100% to the point where I even want to add, again, and as members of Parliament, we express our own opinion and so on because we swore individually, not collectively, each one of us in front of the governor. And that is why necessarily the statements that I make are not necessarily that of the party, because I have my own personal opinions on certain issues. And as it regards to the issue of the Coho itself, you know, my dad was a very good boxer, extremely good. And he always said one thing: if you're going to go in a ring with an opponent, make sure you study him very well and make sure that you are prepared to know exactly what his weaknesses and his strengths are before you enter into the ring. And if you don't think you can beat an opponent, then definitely decline. Even in the boxing world today, you'll find where there are certain professional boxers avoid fighting some because why? They know within themselves, no matter how good they are, this person is much better than they are. And I'm saying that to say this, Madam Chair, through you. The Coho law, for me, I wouldn't even want to venture into it, whatever amendments or changes, because the fact is, it did not come from us as Parliament. It didn't come from the countries. Okay, it came from the Dutch government. And I listened to a presentation by Professor Hogers, which excellent, you know, made on judicial review and so on, procedures and so on, the Crown, this and so on. Those things are fine. But the fact is, it did not come from Aruba, Curaçao, or St. Martin. And another thing that I find in that also, that Coho is the issue of the liquidity support. They're tying all these reform packages to liquidity support. They're talking about sustainable finances and so on, And those songs, very nice, but at the same time, you're issuing loans upon loans upon loans, knowing that we are having difficulties financially, knowing that we're depending on you financially, and then you're telling us you want us to have, what did the state secretary say to me in a meeting that we had face-to-face, financial independence? How is that possible? We owe them right now 1.4 billion guilders. We're paying 12.7 million annually without including the additional 300 million that we have borrowed recently. And you're telling me that you want us to have financial independence? That's impossible. Also, the issue of relationship between the Coho and the Parliament, honestly, Madam Chair, through you, I don't know who the Coho is. Right now we have the TWO, Tijdelijk Werkorganisatie, if I said it correctly, the temporary work group. What are they doing now that the Coho is supposed to do? Because my issue is, if they're already executing the country packages, the reforms and so on, why do we need a Coho? What do you want with a Coho? So, Madam Chair, I'll be very brief for now because I believe Ms. Tackling was correct. Next thing she mentioned also, Madam Chair, to do is the issue of flexibility and so on. I get tired and sick of hearing that word all the time. You know why? It always comes from the IMF and those organizations. Flexible labor market, flexible this, but they don't look at the social aspects as to what the country is going through. You want to assist us, when I go back to the Dutch government with the Coho, at the same time, you hit us at 12.5%, we have to cut in operational costs, and you still want to say that you're doing it on behalf of the people of St. Martin. Now, who's crazy? That's ridiculous. Who do we think we are? So if you really want to assist us, then with regards to the capacity, then you give us the capacity and the finances, and start by looking at the matter of the debt cancellation, because it'll take us 100 years to pay off the existing debt and more than that now. Again, Madam Chair, that's a discussion when I saw the report of the first and second chamber that came out in the argument document, I think it was, and so on. Nothing was mentioned of debt cancellation because why? That's not possible. Who tells it's not possible? It is possible because when you left it in 1865, you gave us nothing. Nothing we didn't start with. So don't start with 2010. Let's go further back. Again, Madam Chair, some don't like to hear that kind of discussion, but it is a reality. It is a reality. So, Madam Chair, through you, again, I say I'll be brief. I just want to thank Ms. Tackling for your presentation, and I read that from Lieutenant Governor and from Minister of Justice, Mr. Dennis Richardson. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Van der Vlat. You would like to respond? Yes. Yes, Ms. Tackling.
Thank you, MP Pantevlet. There were just a couple points that I found that were interesting, and I kind of just wanted to maybe add a little clarification from the legal perspective, and just because there were changes that I noticed in the law, so maybe they would be interesting just to point out. One is the matter of the liquidity support. Essentially, we see two streams of money running through the Coho now, right? That was very unclear, I think, before as to how the money was going to who and to what. That was made clearer. The liquidity support exactly is still there, but in the case that there is not enough, there's not a balanced budget. So if we cannot balance the budget, then the liquidity supports portion of this kicks in. Then, of course, there's the funding of the Coho as an entity itself, their administrative and everything that goes with that, from the budget of the minister or the state secretary of BZK. And then, of course, there's also this additional revenue stream where it comes to subsidies that can be given to private citizens and to companies and things like that. And I think parallel to that, what you see also is within the plans of approach, agreements can be made on how projects are executed. Of course, we also have to lend from the Netherlands for our capital investments, and the money that needs to be spent within the Coho or within the implementation agendas, within the plans of approach, all of these need to be included in the national budget, which also will be checked by the CFT. These were amendments that were added recently as well, that the CFT would also check our budget for adherence to the measures that were agreed upon. So whether the measures that are contained in the implementation agenda, in the plans of approach, whether there's actually sufficient budgetary room in order to carry out those projects. So we do see different streams of revenue running. I think, of course, the whole idea, like you said, is the financial independence, and that eventually, we will get to a place where we can afford, to not have to have liquidity support anymore. That's I think the goal, of course. And then we would go back to capital expenditures, and then having low percentage loans from the Netherlands, because of course we know the structure of the Rijkswet Financieel Toezicht, and we know how that goes, so I don't need to rehash how that works. In terms of the TWO, from the legal perspective, I would say the reason that we still need the Coho is so that we have a legal basis for what's going on. And also, of course, the fact that there are, I would say that from a perspective of legal certainty, that my preference would be have the Kingdom Act, because at least then there's clear delineations between who is responsible for what and under what conditions. And you know, there have been some amendments made now to also ensure that the Kingdom Council of Ministers can't keep moving the goalposts, can't keep moving the conditions. And right now, it's the idea on paper is that there are very clear agreements on the implementation agendas, on the budgets that will be made available for the implementation of these different reforms, and that also, of course, these are measurable targets. And that's, I think, different than what we've seen so far. Not just, hey, increase the pension age, or, oh, actually, while you're doing that, you didn't do that yet, go and do this too. Go fix your ZVOV fund. So those things, we're stepping away from these kind of ad hoc, reactive measures and ways of moving the goalposts, moving more towards a structured, more smart, defined principles where we can actually measure and test against whether the countries are making progress. So I think that that's at least an improvement compared to where we have been in the past, or where we have been in the past 12 years since 10-10-10. I think those were the points that I had noted that I wanted to kind of touch on. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tacklin. I see that MP Duncan would like to have the floor. MP?
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Good morning to you. Good morning to my colleagues, the SG. A good morning to Ms. Tackling and Mr. Richardson, and of course a good morning to the people of St. Martin tuned in. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Tackling, for your presentation. I think you definitely added something important to the conversation and the discussion. You know, getting to the root cause of our issues, because that's what it's about. There is so much going on at the same time with Coho, and you just actually mentioned it in responding to MP Pantaflet, because for me, maybe I'm trying to compartmentalize everything, but if I look back at history, and maybe Mr. Richardson will touch on this, looking at Lewis and how things were handled then, and then the need now, and you just said it, the need or basis for a legal basis for this, these agreements, that is necessary, and that's where we are right now. But then we're talking about liquidity support, budgetary support, then we're talking about maybe development funds for NGOs and so forth. We have the NRPB that is operating. I'm trying to look at everything that is happening and trying to game out what would be indeed the best alternative, or how can the Coho work alongside the NRPB, because we are an extremely vulnerable small country, and we will continue to be vulnerable. We do need the reforms. We're growing. It's been 12 years, but we will face disasters in the future, and then we will also be in positions in which we will need assistance, whether it's from the Dutch government, I mean, maybe in the future the United Nations, the World Bank, and so forth. So I wanted your opinion on, through you, Madam Chair, the current workings of, let's say, the NRPB next to what could be the Coho, and the future of that, if that makes any sense, I hope. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Duncan. Ms. Tacklin?
I'll attempt to answer this one.
Okay.
It's like an alphabet soup, right, of different entities, the Coho, CFT, NRPB, World, yeah, there's no abbreviation for that one, right? You know, I of course, a lot of these different entities have all come about with, they usually all had a temporary nature, and we still see that a lot of them are still around. And in that sense, I think we can question the effectiveness of the different ones. If the idea was, hey, it should be done in 6 years and we're still here 12 years later with CFT just being extended again, then, and of course, there are reasons, I think, along the way, hurricanes, this and that, as to why we're still under financial supervision. But the point I wanted to make is that a lot of times we get these entities that are created for a specific purpose. And NRPB in this case, or the World Bank, this was, our resilience, it's kind of to build back better, the hurricane. That also has a temporary nature. The question is, how long until that pot is finished? And then of course, you might question, okay, well, is it effective to try to transform an organization that's working with a very specific task to then carry out everything that's envisaged with the Coho? Perhaps not. And in that sense, then maybe it's better for us to try something else. So to answer your question, I think a little bit they all have very different goals and purposes. If we look at what the envisaged goal for the Coho, it's really kind of these structural reforms that hit on things that are outside reconstruction, that are outside kind of the resilience of course, the resilience of our economy. Arguably, there's a space maybe that blurs between the Coho and NRPB and what's going on there. But also the funding that's been put into that trust fund is also temporary, and the agreements that are in place with different parties are also temporary in terms of the country of the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the World Bank. It does, become very bureaucratic when we have all these different entities existing next to each other. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but the hope, I think, is that I hope that the NRPB can finish the money that's in that trust fund and spend it into things that are noticeable, that are measurable, that contribute to the island environmentally, structurally, and that these, the reforms that the Coho, I think, is looking at, those also have a lot more place within our civil service apparatus. There's so much, I think, that needs to happen from within government itself in order to carry out the reforms that the Coho is achieving, that compared to NRPB. NRPB, we're able to work with a smaller entity, a smaller ZBO as it is, where they're funneling money into different organizations that are carrying out the projects. So the expertise and I think the focus are different if you compare the two. So in that sense, I do see why the choice would have been made to maybe focus the efforts differently here. And what we're seeing now, even within the TWO and within the country packages that are going on so far, there's a lot of assistance between the civil servants within the different ministries in the Netherlands, within the different ministries here, and then they form kind of steering committees and steering groups within the individual projects. And I think that's a point of departure from how we've done things with the NRPB, where it was actually taken out of government and done in a separate bureau. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Ms. Stacklin. I see next on the speakers list, I have MP Christophe Emmanuel. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning to you, Garrick, my honorable colleagues. Good morning to everyone, our esteemed panelists, guests, Ms. Stacklin and Mr. Richardson. Good morning to everyone. Madam Chair, I would like to ask you, have you ever seen the movie Amistad? Yeah? There's a part in that movie where Sinke was speaking to one of the individuals and asked him, where are you from? Are you from Cuba? And he got up and he walked about 10 steps and asked him if you're from there. And then Sinke got up and he walked about 100 steps. He said, I'm not from Cuba. He walked like 100 steps to show him the distance where he came from to be where he at today. And I think it's disingenuous when we have intellectuals come into Parliament, and I'm not saying that it's coming from that side, but look down on St. Martin as if we have done absolutely nothing in 12 years. And then we come with the narrative, and this is all that you're hearing. Oh, we so do need what reforms? What are the reforms that we so do need? What are they? My first question to the esteemed lady, Ms. Stacklin, Why do we need a Coho? Why do we need it? Because I can't get it understand. It's disturbing to me that individuals who nobody in this country voted for, 8,000 miles away, look down on St. Martin and decide this is what is best for you. And then we get our intellectuals saying, you know, it's best we try to find a way to work with it and try to find a way. It's a divisive tool. What it does, it separates citizens in a so-called kingdom. You and us. It separates us. And I can't get it understand. Madam Chair Lady, I was part of a government. I was a minister. 2016, 2017. It was the National Alliance, Democratic Party, and the USP. We started on those reforms. We started paying SZV. We started with the government building. We started with the pension. We started on those reforms. We had 2 balanced budgets. 2. We started working on all those things. But guess what? We didn't create Hurricane Irma. We didn't create it. And my colleague MP Pantaflet, Madam Chair, spoke about it. 1.4 billion guilders in debt under the watch of the CFT. And nowhere in the Coho is it mentioned. Nowhere. Nowhere. And you know what's even disturbing, Madam Chair Lady? This organization that came into Parliament one time, and now on their recommendations, they decided the Coho, the CFT, going to get a longer time in St. Martin. Nowhere did it mention their faults, their agreements, their things that they had to live up to. Nowhere is it mentioned. Only St. Martin, as if we have done nothing in 12 years. We built a country with no help. The honorable gentleman, Mr. Richardson, can say it. He was the Minister of Justice with no tools. The first minister, Dennis, Mr. Duncan, nothing. Built it from scratch. All the expertise remain in Curacao, all the intellectuals remain in Curacao, all the infrastructure remain in Curacao, the building, everything remained there. St. Martin had to build everything from scratch. St. Martin, Madam Chair Lady, is different. And I keep saying it over and over. And imagine, Curacao and Aruba only had a pandemic, and their economy collapsed. St. Martin had a major devastating hurricane and a pandemic, and our economy didn't collapse. It was on hold. It halted. That now it's picking back up. It didn't collapse. We are different. They don't understand what a hurricane is because they don't experience it. And then the narrative we get from NRPB and the Dutch, and then our esteemed panelists coming in saying it as well. Build back better in the assumption as if we have been building wrong before. No, we haven't. We know how to build in this country for hurricanes. I've said it with the other panel. What the Coho and everyone else and the Dutch government, all those who think we need it, is not addressing is why the hurricanes and these natural disasters are bigger and stronger. And we here in this region takes the brunt of it. We suffers it because of their carbon emissions, because of what they are doing. And we feel it. So it's disturbing to me that we get smart people, smart individuals, is telling us, try to find a way to work with the Coho. For what? What we are not hearing is, you need to take a position, St. Martin, and throw the Coho out the door. It's not good for us. No, but if you look at this and the reforms, is we really need it. And I'm asking, what are the reforms that we really need 12 years old? 12 years old. What reforms do we need that Nijmegen doesn't need? That Leeuwarden doesn't need? That Groningen doesn't need? That Dordrecht doesn't need? that Zwala doesn't need. What? There is no Coho nowhere else in the kingdom but St. Martin, Curacao, and Aruba. And then you're telling me it's not a divisive tool. Simply because St. Martin in particular had a major, devastating, monstrous hurricane and the pandemic, and we needed liquidity support. That now, in 2 years, we don't need it. We don't need it. When I have the discussion concerning debt cancellation with my esteemed colleague, MP Pantaflet, we go back and forth, and we can agree to disagree. 700 million sitting down at APS, 3 million every year GB sends to Curacao, to Villanova. The EBITDA of the harbor, 900 and something million. The EBITDA of GEBE, 800 and something million. The airport, 700 and something million. The smallest one in terms of value is Telem at 200 and something million. That we own. St. Martin money. Our gold reserve and half of the shares in the central bank that belongs to St. Martin. Our own money. Ours, belongs to us. What money do we need? My good colleagues who are here before can explain to the people of St. Martin the harbor buyback shares. So we can't get APS buyback shares. We can't get GEBE buyback shares. We can't get... Why we can't? Those same things we needed and we have done to generate money. The issue I have, Madam Chair Lady, you're telling me I need reforms that comes with liquidity. And if I don't accept it, I don't get liquidity, and yet you're telling me I can't borrow. And that is not being addressed in the Coho. It's like a hamster running on the wheel. Going never, ever reach its destination. Never. And then you know what we get? Oh, but you guys accepted that. You guys accepted that. 2 balanced budget. A hurricane hit. Let us negotiate. Because if it's 2 balanced budget and the third one and the CFK says, no, you got to go on a deficit budget, so now the 2 balanced budget you had before don't exist no more. And we're not hearing our esteemed colleagues and our esteemed panelists and all of them are coming and say, you know, you should try to negotiate those things. Because you was on a track, you was on a good way of making these reforms. So it disturbs me as if we forget that we started and we tried. We started. No, Madam Chair Lady, I have a serious issue when we are being talked down at, condescended at, as if we have done absolutely nothing in this country. When we put capital expenditures aside to deal with the prison and deal with all of these reforms, the CFT told us no. Come on, man. Madam Chair. My colleague MP George, if I'm lying, tell me and say I'm lying. Say it. We had a tough time, Madam Chair, dealing with Minister of Finance Gibson, putting monies aside to deal with exactly the reforms that we are talking about here today. The tax office, all those things, healthcare, SZV, APS, all the money that we had owed. We started with those reforms. We had a government that started with those reforms. And it seems as if everyone forgot. Everyone forgot that today we are entertaining the narrative of a Coho. And when we give it validity, when we give it the voice that, yes, we do need these reforms, we are inviting the presence of the Coho. No, it's the wrong narrative. It's a wrong approach. And I'm disturbed and saddened when intellectuals come and see it that way. No, it can't be. We are 12 years old. 12. The Netherlands is 374 years old, and they are still dealing with reforms that they have to be dealt, that they're dealing with. Still. They had the powerhouse and the might of the United States to help them after World War II, when their cousin Germany bombed them. Who helps us? We didn't. You made mention, but we would constantly be needed handouts. But we have never needed it before. We have never needed it before. Because we have managed to dodge hurricanes and all that. What we are asking for is help temporarily. And I can't get it to understand, again, how intellectuals come into Parliament and don't see that the liquidity and everything is being used as a tool to change the paradigm in St. Martin. It disturbs me. That's why my question is, why do we need a Coho? Why? Why do we need a Coho? It's a Dutch entity. It's not of St. Martin. That's my only question. Why do we need it? Why do we need it? We didn't need it before. We are like in a stiff jacket. And then we are being asked, you better plaster the wall and make sure the blocks are straight and pull your chalk line good, but you're in a stiff jacket. And then we still got to come down the ladder, fill the buckets up with sand, gravel, sand, cement, walk back up the ladder, make your bed, make your sand, fill it with water, mix it up, and lay your row of blocks and fill your columns and to build this house, but you're in a stiff jacket. And who have us in the stiff jacket? The contractor. But you're telling the workers and them, make sure you get it done. But we're in a stiff jacket. And no one addresses those issues. Those issues are not being addressed. 1.4 billion in debt under their watch. It's not being addressed. It's not being addressed. I can't get it to understand. I thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Manuel. I turn the floor over to Ms. Natalie Tacklin.
Thank you, MP Emmanuel, for your insightful comments. I think there's an important distinction to be made between you and I here today in Parliament. My role here is, as a lawyer, I'm here to talk about the law, to talk about the loopholes in the law, to talk about where there's room for you to move around. The statements I think you want to hear from me regarding reforms and the necessity of reforms and the quantification of reforms, those are political statements, those are political discussions, and I respect your position here as a parliamentarian to hit those points and to speak to the people, to speak to your constituents where that's concerned. But I'm not here today to defend one choice for or against. I'm here just to stay neutral making, and by no means did I mean to diminish anything that has been done by this country in the past 12 years. Balanced budgets, that's true. But of course, there's always something to be said about how that was achieved. If we had a balanced budget where we didn't have to take 17.5 million guilders out to GB to balance the budget, we would have had that money after Irma that we wouldn't have needed from the Netherlands. So it's very easy to speak in hindsight about how things could have been done differently or why things were done that way, but we make decisions and we have to live with the consequences of them after. So we could have also not had a balanced budget and we could have had that money 2 years later. So those are I think, different things for us to look at. The budget was balanced, that's all that matters, right? So, and also in terms of statements such as, I heard things like buying shares or APS buying back shares and things like that. I understand the political sentiment of that from a practical perspective is difficult. Organizations such as APS are under supervision by the central bank. We're only allowed to spend money a certain way. And again, you can do something like that, but then we might get a same balanced budget part 2 story. So, it's, like I said, I don't mean to diminish anything that St. Martin has achieved over the years. I think we have done it. We see Aruba in a certain position as a much older country than us, also having a Coho put on them while they had a lot more time to kind of figure it out. And it's, like I said, it wasn't that your intellectuals are coming in here to diminish anything or to say that we need the Coho, yes or no. Like I said, my job here is as a lawyer to assess the law and to, as Parliament, to give you an idea of where you can maybe use certain areas of the law to exploit it to your benefit. Whether or not, St. Martin wants it or not, that's a very political decision, and that's one that you have to make and not me. So I think I touched on most of what was said. I think your main question was why do we need a Coho? That is the question, and that's one that needs to be discussed politically. But I did have a note actually. You said we have people far away in the Netherlands telling us what they think is best for us, and that tied in actually very nicely to what I was saying before in terms of reforms for us by us. We need to own it, and it shouldn't be. And we go back to the Dutch Tekentafel because they feel like we haven't done it enough. So how do we take that assertiveness to show that we have a vision and that we are actually implementing it, not just a story on paper with a lot of clouds that's pretty and rainbows, but actual measurable plans of approach that are properly thought out. And you might agree, I see from your reaction that you feel that they're there, but there seems to be a disconnect, at least with somebody telling us then that, hey, you're not doing it enough, and us saying, well, no, I did it enough. So again, and that's my thing of how do we bridge that gap? How do we make it that it's us, it's ours, and that we can own that? And that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Stacklin. I see then that we have now exhausted the discussion from Ms. Stacklin's presentation, and I'd like to then move to the next presenter, Mr. Dennis Richardson, to have your comments and opening remarks, and your presentation and opening remarks. Mr. Richardson, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. In the first place, I need to apologize for not having a presentation up there like was asked. I'm sorry about that. I really only noticed the request the last time I read the letter. On the other hand, it gives me the opportunity to freewheel a little bit more on what was presented and what was said since. So to keep the discussion or the conversation interesting, I'm going to do a little bit of freewheeling around what is happening. I believe that the whole discussion about Coho and which farm that has become a poison pill by the way it was brought to the countries. You got a proposal for which you had to sign within 48 hours, and otherwise we would lose the liquidity support that was absolutely necessary given the circumstances that we were in. Not only that, the content of the original proposal was putting St. Martin back, not as a country, I would say, but maybe even less than a local community as in the Netherlands. To intervene in the local community in the Netherlands, the provincial government or the central government of the Netherlands will have to prove that the local community is not doing anything with its tasks and responsibilities, that it is really the places. That's the only circumstances that allows for such draconic measures as was proposed, in fact, in the original thing. And that's why I'm glad that the countries all rejected the proposal, even with maybe in the face of losing the liquidity support that was necessary, because it really robbed you of your autonomy that you had. But as a result of that, the whole Coho proposal has become like a poison pill. It has absorbed our energy in the past months to combat it, so that we have lost time and the possibilities of sitting down and saying, okay, but if the Dutch government is now willing to give us a helping hand, which they were not in favor of doing before, because I can tell you, as Minister of Justice, a number of times I've asked for help, that was refused. And that was refused simply because there was a kind of reaction to the fact that St. Martin was the country that engineered the dissolution of the Netherlands Antilles in the form of a referendum that said we are stepping out, that others followed and also step out. And it was kind of a, I would say, lashing out. Maybe that's too strong an expression. Well, you putting on a big pants, now wear it. That kind of an attitude towards St. Martin. You want to become a country with it? Well, go ahead, do your thing, and you have to do that on your own. In speaking informally to some of the people who were involved in this, they said, no, that wasn't it. It was more that we defined you as a country. It was a legal aspect, and we felt we shouldn't be involved in whatever it is you're doing. Well, I don't know about that. I just told them, I say, there's also United Nations agreements that if you're busy with decolonization, you also have the responsibility to help the new emerging nation to be as good a nation as possible and help them on their feet and get them going. So that aspect clearly did not sufficiently play a role. But now there was an initiative, I was told also, again, via my informal contacts, an initiative to say, okay, we understand that St. Martin as a small nation country has limitations as far as capacity and other things is concerned. Let us start with offering the assistance that they need. That's how the discussion at the ministry started in The Hague. But in that period of time, a short period of time, it evolved from let's assist them to, in fact, let's control the whole process. And let us do it for them, with all the negative consequences that would have had for your autonomy, but also with the fact that once they left, you would still be with empty hands and would not have addressed the issues structurally that we should have addressed. If we had the time to discuss what this reform should entail, it would have to be strategically positioned. Because what is the problem? If you look at the areas of which the Landstaten, the country tasks are in, they cover the whole spectrum of government. It's financial administration, costs and effective public sector, taxes, financial sector, economic reform, care, education, and strengthening of the safety and security within the countries. I mean, that's the whole government in fact. That's one. Secondly, the thing about government is continuously in development. There are continuous changes. And what we have as a big problem is that our country is not sufficiently isolated from shocks, external shocks. So if there's a hurricane, if there's an earthquake, if there's an economic recession in the United States of America, if there's a pandemic and all those kind of things, we have not enough reserves built up in the 12 years that we are here to be able to deal with that. So if you want to deal with reform, it is not so much that our politicians here in St. Martin and our government administration here in St. Martin doesn't understand the need for reforms. Like Manuel said, we were busy with them. We were busy with the pension long before it became a demand, a condition sine qua non for finance. A number of things we were busy. We weren't busy with everything. I agree as far as that is concerned, but that is also the problem of a small nation. You can't do everything at the same time, but neither does larger countries are not able to do things. They also have to set priorities, and things develop over time. That is the challenge of what we are sitting with, and we should have been more busy with how to strategically use this opportunity to strengthen our resilience. That would be it. Let us talk about creating funds that in times of need can be used in a proper fashion, to deal with the issues of that moment. And the gradual strengthening of the country will take place over time. You don't have to do it from one day to the next. Not only do you don't have to do it, you can't do it from one day to the next, given the demands it has as far as capacity and finances is concerned. So what we need to be able to do at this moment, but which we're not doing because of the poison pill situation, is focusing on how to strengthen the resilience of your country in the coming years, making use of offers that are done to you by the Dutch government. I mean, we have to be practical as well. In the interest of our own people, if somebody offers you help and you need that help, you wouldn't be doing right to your people if you don't accept the help. But if you have a psychological block to accepting that help because of what happened before, and I think that is what is happening at this moment, you have a psychological against it because you don't trust it anymore. you felt that you were being ramrodded into a certain direction that you did not want to go, and therefore the level of trust has deteriorated, then we are creating a problem for ourselves as well. So I have a tendency to say, let's be practical. Maybe let's be as opportunistic as the Dutch. You give us, you're giving us a helping hand, we're going to accept that helping hand, but we need it to be used in a way that structurally strengthens our position in the future, that makes us less vulnerable and more resilient towards the needs and the threats that our country could be involved in. That's what. The other aspect is, as I've said that many times to Dutch ministers and so, you need to leave this way of approaching the countries then, when this needs to be done, it has to be done now, and we'll do it for you. That isn't working. Many of you have made that observation already. When you do it for me, I don't really learn anything. All you leave is a gap when you move on. It comes to mind the old saying, don't give me fish, teach me how to fish. Maybe you should, the help should be focused on how to build an organization that can adequately assist the government, the governing organization, the governing entities, the parliament and the ministries into dealing with the issues, instead of having to ad hoc run here and there and do things like that. Might be more important for the resilience of the country in the future, structurally speaking, than just doing an incidental thing that will still have to be done. We change the taxes today, we know in 10 years' time you probably have to change the taxes again. So help us to be able to structurally deal with our problems. That might be a better use of the help that is being offered to us than the incidentals that we will get in the coming years, with, and even at this moment, not an idea of how it's going to be financed, and, as the MP say, with increasing debt, while the debt level that you have already is said by the CFT is too high. You know, so let's take that also into consideration to see whether eliminating the debt wouldn't help strengthen the country financially in such a way that it can deal with the many issues that it is confronted with. I think as far as I'm concerned, I could stop here because all the other topics have been covered already. and it is more of a reaction of what I've been hearing than an analysis of what has been proposed to us at this moment. So with that, I would like to close my part of the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I would like to just take a brief 5-minute adjournment before we move over to the discussion, continuation of discussion. So the continuation of discussion, sorry. So I will now take a 5-minute adjournment, meeting adjourned until in 5 minutes. Welcome back, members of parliament. We took a brief adjournment, and now we will now proceed. I'd like to now turn the floor over to the members of parliament to see if anyone would like to comment or ask question to Mr. Richardson's presentation. I see MP Emmanuel would like to have the floor.
Madam Chair Lady, thank you very much. Every time I look across, I see Ms. Tackling smiling, so I want to apologize if you felt that in any way I was coming at the intellectuals in a manner of, no, that's not the case at all as it was. I just, not that I get emotional, but I need to point out where we are today and where we came from as a country. And I think, yes, not saying that we don't have reforms that we need to get on fast and quick, but it comes with a cost. And St. Martin people, St. Martin smart people, St. Martin regular people, all of us built this country with nothing. No one helped us. No one helped us. The first Prime Minister 1, 2, 3 times, MP Westcott Williams, Gracita Arenel, President of Parliament, Minister Dennis Richardson, Minister Richard Gibson, we, our own people, built it to where it is today. And then, could things have been better? Yes, yes. But there are many things beyond our control that we just was learning as we go about. You can imagine a country 4 and 5 years old building a justice department from scratch with no help. Madam Chair, through you, our honorable panelist, Mr. Richardson, made mention of the old adjective of, teach me how to fish. I don't want nobody to teach me how to fish. I want you to give me the tools to fish, and I can learn myself. Okay, because it makes no sense you teach me how to fish, Madam Chair Lady, but you don't give me the fishing rod, you don't give me the fishing line, you don't give me the fishing hook, you don't give me the bait. You just put me down in a class, give me the theory, and teach me how to fish, but I still don't have the tools on how to fish. And that is exactly the point that we have here. That's exactly what it is. We had to build our own infrastructure. And that's what I said on my newscast yesterday with the Dutch government, and even why I'm disappointed with them and saddened and disgusted with our government. Because they assume, Madam Chair, they assume that they know what is best for us. They don't know our culture. They don't know our traditions. Many of them, like what Professor Hogan, have never even been to St. Martin. Have never even been to St. Martin. And I wanted to make the point when you said our progress. Yes, but who is to determine our progress? Not the Dutch government or the people in the Netherlands. St. Martin people, when they go to the polls, is to determine our progress. The people of St. Martin. So yes, we have to own it. So as much as we are being trampled in owning everything that is bad, for goodness gracious, come on, there must be good things that we have to own too as well. There must be things that we have to own too as well. Again, Madam Chair Lady, through you, the issue in particular, what I have with the Coho is that it doesn't take, and I hear my colleague MP Westcott Williams make mention of it, it doesn't take the structure and the confines of St. Martin struggles. They cast a broad net, Aruba, St. Martin, and Curacao, and take that. We are different. Yes, we are in the same region, but we in particular, St. Martin, we are different. And that's why I said, to me, it's divisive. It's not an entity or a tool that's bringing us together. Because at the end of it, Madam Chair, trust me well, Curacao and Aruba are going to do what it is necessary for Curacao and Aruba. They're going to do what is necessary for Curacao and Aruba. I don't see, Madam Chair, how it is with the country packages and this Coho and the law and everything, how it's bringing people together, how it's bringing us together. I don't see it. I see it as more of a separation. And if we don't address that issue, address it in terms of negotiating, sitting down, talking, coming on a table with the Netherlands, with our government, with the parliament, and saying, listen, these are our issues that we are facing. And we are facing them because there was a lot of promises that you made and you didn't live up to. You didn't live up to them. I heard Madam Chair, Dennis Richardson made mention that Holland probably view us as the one who destroyed the Netherlands Antilles. But that's precisely the point. Because of neglect. Because of neglect, St. Martin felt that we were being neglected. And it is the same thing right now. Same thing. Neglect. Yes, Aruba is much more older than us. But imagine you coming out of a house that has everything in it, and your bigger brother remains with everything, and all you have is a piece of land. And you are told, go and build your house with no help. With no help. That's my issue. I don't see the help. I don't see, oh no, let me put it this way, Madam Chair Lady. I don't see the genuine help. I don't see it. And we have done things in the past. And I understand when you said that, in theory it sounds good. But practical and getting the bureaucracy and everything is another thing we'll have to deal with. The harbor buyback shares in theory sound good too as well. But it was done. It was done. Those brainzers that came up with that mechanism at the time to bring it where it's at, but it was done. So what are we saying, that we don't have those type of people in parliament and government anymore? No. What we do have now, Madam Chair, what we do have right now is a government that's either inept or simply don't know how. Don't know how. This is our country. And I look at Ms. Tackman and I look at, and you're telling me that we can't do it? We can't do it? I refuse to believe that. I refuse to believe it. Yes, we can do it. And I agree, yes, we have to own up to it. And we will. And we're going to acknowledge the bad, but we should also acknowledge the good. We have done good. For 12 years, with nothing, we have done good. I was explaining during the break, if I remember when Caruso walked in and took the computers and the cars and everything from the post office. Even up to that. There's nothing we could have done, lap our tail in. There's nothing we could have done. Because not even those things we had owned. Still being in partnership. Still being in partnership, Madam Chair Lady. 200 employees. 200 employees at the central bank. Only 10 in St. Martin. All those things are not mentioned in all those things that are impediments to our growth. I haven't seen not one of them mentioned in the country packages or in the code. Not one, nothing. I heard my colleague next to me talk about the NRPB and steering committee and all those entities. But look at our schools. Look at our schools. And I don't want nobody to get me wrong, but we have a tennis court in Cahill. $600,000 euros to build that in Cahill. Yeah, across from Bel Air. The tennis thing across from Bel Air. 600,000. But look at Martin Luther King School. Look at Martin Luther King School. Madam Chair Lady, we had the state secretary came to St. Martin. Came to St. Martin. We had the NRBP and steering committee and all of them told her that they have repaired 1,400 homes in this country. 1,400 homes. Where? 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 But we have a law that is coming to St. Martin, and we either try to amend it, we have to try to work around it, we have to try to live with it. No, I am saying simply, don't entertain it, period. But what we have to do is present our plan. This is what we want to talk about. Madam Chair Lady, we can't be in a kingdom if those in the kingdom ain't willing to have a discussion and talk with us. Then really and truly, we are not decolonized. Can't be. Can't be. Madam Chair Lady, the only thing I would like to ask Dennis Richardson, because I know he have been in that hot seat as a minister. I remember when he took off his shoe and said, I can't walk in his shoes. And then I took off mine and say, look at the size of my shoes, you know. But it was being said, you know, in terms of the justice, I would like him to explain if he can remember the work he had to put in to bring it to a level where it is today. And if there was any help, when he asked for help, what was told to him. Madam Chair Lady, thank you very much.
Thank you, MP Emmanuel. Mr. Richardson, would you like to respond one time to MP Emmanuel's question?
Yes, well, you yourself have said it, MP, that we had to build our Justice Department from scratch. It wasn't there. Not only the Justice Department, but the police force was also very much below capacity that it should have been. I remember the days when if there was a serious crime in St. Martin, officers were flown in from Curacao to do the work and then flown back out once they've done it. So our country was seriously understaffed when it came to these kind of operations. And asking for help wasn't easy. I remember when we tried to get help from the Dutch Police Academy to train our officers, and that was refused. Now it is possible. So, I mean, time passes and things change. Now it is possible. Now it is being done. Now we get support from the Koninklijke Marechaussee, and we even get support for the customs at the moment. But in those days, that was not the case, and I told you what we were in the pause. I told you that we started with a financial information unit, what we call the MOT, Meldpunt Ongewone Transacties, with a room full of computers, but nobody behind them. That was the contribution that was made. They had to be built from scratch, and that was with many different aspects of our community. The Misladi Center is an example that we ourselves built here, created here, and then with ups and downs as you go along, because sometimes there's money and sometimes there was not. So yeah, you're completely correct when you say most of those things we had to build from scratch. We have today, I think, a government organization that is light years ahead of what we had in those days. But we know that it still has its shortcomings. We still need people with good legal minds who can make laws. We still need civil servants who can adequately advise us on policy development. We still need people with who can do adequate planning to the future, so that we know what we need to do and phase it properly. And we need, and I don't have to repeat that is known, we know our tax office need upgrading. I mean, there are many things still that has to happen in the coming years. And that is why I say, but if someone is offering to help us, we should accept it. Whether that's a Coho construction or not, I don't know. I believe some fundamental changes have been brought into the draft law. The Coho was needed, the Coho as a kingdom law was needed for it to operate as it was perceived, because it didn't have the authority to do those things without a law. Now, many of those things have been cut out of the law, so the question could be asked, is it needed? Why can't we just sit down around the table and do things like we did after Hurricane Louis? Yeah, we sat down and we did great work after Hurricane Louis, and there was no specific law necessary to do it. But what has changed since then is that disasters that overcome us are often used as leverage to impose certain changes in our community. That was a new development that wasn't there in those years, but that now is seen as common. It is also cited in the draft law. If we're going to give you money, we have to be able to set conditions, because the money is taxpayers' money of the Netherlands, and they have to be held accountable for the way it is being used and make sure that it's used properly. So, yeah, there's a little give and take as far as that is concerned. The question alone was how. And the way it was being done in the Coho original proposal was, in my opinion, completely not acceptable, and that was also what my advice was to the Prime Minister when I was asked to give my view on it in the early stages of the debate. Two things were not acceptable to me: a kind of a blackmail issue from sign here on the dotted line, or forget the financial aid, and secondly, the construct of a Coho with these massive authorities on all issues that were purely local. It wasn't in kingdom discussions, no, it was purely local issues that had to be dealt with, and they were going to do with it without the political context of St. Martin, without the social context of St. Martin. That is not acceptable, and I think that Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin did a great work by fighting it, and the Raad van State van het Koninkrijk, the Kingdom Council of State, was the one that shut it down completely. In fact, if you really look at the law, it was completely shut down as a wrong way to go about doing giving a helping hand.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I'd like to turn the floor over now to MP George Ponteflet for your questions or remarks.
No, I don't know if I have any question, Madam Chair. Thank you, but just remarks. And I'll try to be brief, because there's sometimes when you hear discussions or you enter in discussions such as these, there's so much that comes to mind again and makes you go way back. But I want to thank Mr. Richardson because I've been able to enter his office when he was Minister of Justice, open door policy, which I appreciate very much, and know exactly what transpired during the 10-10-10. And just to give a little historical background, indeed, I do believe that the issue of St. Martin voting, let's say, to step out of the Nelson Antilles, it definitely was St. Martin's prerogative, and I believe, in all honesty, that Curacao was not too happy about it, and of course, by extension, neither the Dutch. I can recall very well that that meeting almost didn't take place because the then Prime Minister, I believe, I can't remember his name right now, but I'll get back to it afterwards, did not want to have the meeting called in order to discuss that particular ordinance. Madam Chair, so much was said already before, and the issue of capacity was mentioned more than once. It was even mentioned in several meetings that we had yesterday and the day before. And why I talk about going back a little bit in history, I can recall very well when, as a member of the Island Council, I sat in the faction office, and I got a visit from a Mr. Ralph Pants. He was from at the time, I think voorzitter van de Nederlandse gemeenten, the Vereniging van Nederlandse Gemeenten. And he walked into the office himself, and I think I would say his secretary or his assistant, and we were discussing St. Martin's role as to what has to happen prior to obtaining a separate status. And I'm talking, I think it was 2006, to show how far back. And the question he asked me, and I never forgot it, he said, does St. Martin have what it takes to handle separate status. And I said to him, I don't think so at this moment. We would need your assistance. But you should not become a revolving door. Why do I say this? Because civil servant who passed away some years ago, who's been there for quite a long time, one who I learned quite a lot from, I'm going to mention his name, the late Duzonzong. He said one of the problems that we have had in the past was when these assistants came in, that very often we didn't take time to sit down next to them and to learn from them, or in other instances, they didn't want to teach us much because why? They want to make room so that their colleagues will come back and work in the same position. You see? And now today we find ourselves now talking about capacity and so on, and that's why I had to mention that. Madam Chair, I wouldn't go into really the issue of the balanced budget because we already addressed that, but simply to say that it is unfortunate indeed that the CFT, who has an advisory role, but at the same time, I find it's still too much of a role or too much of a insight, not only insight rather, decisive decision making when it comes to our budget. They are talking about us having a balanced budget in 2023, which is next year. Not taking into consideration possible hurricanes, not taking into consideration that still we are faced with loans that the IMF stated that if the Dutch government does not turn those loans into donations or grants, that we will never return to pre-hurricane status. The issue of the 75 million guilders, which was floated and then retracted because why? It was under threat. Because when I asked around, Madam Chair, through you, it was the institutions who were able or willing to contribute to the furthering of those bonds, was scared when they heard statement by the CFT and then afterwards by the State Secretary Cont as to the 50 million, which was going to be due, I think, in October of that particular year. So I wouldn't even go into that because my issue was I'm going to say no, I was disappointed in those institutions. Why? Because it should not be what the CFT says or what the Dutch government says. It should have been the point, will St. Martin be able to pay back when those bonds become due? That should be a position, not what the CFT said, but of course, that's a capacité de station. Plans of approach was mentioned already. Implementation plans and so on. The supervision of the central bank. Madam Chair, this might seem not really relevant, but I'll still mention because at times it is good to pass on information. And some will say, what does it have to do with the Coho? As we speak, the Canadian bank just opened an account for the Chinese yuan to replace the dollar to a certain extent. Why do I mention this, Madam Chair, through you? When we had the director of the central bank, Mr. Dordrecht, I think his name is, yes?
Doornbos.
Doornbos. What's his first name again?
Sorry?
His first name, I'm trying to remember his first name.
Richard.
Okay, Richard Doornbos. Thank you very much. I said to him, right here in the meeting, we had a Committee of Finance meeting, I said, look, I think you should look at other currencies in order to prevent, God forbid, that the dollar loses its power in the national market, that at least we have another currency to deal with. And he said to me, no, the dollar remains strong for many years. As we can see, based on Ukraine-Russia war, and what's going on right now, the dollar and the petrodollar and so on we're talking about, we are having some issues. We have to be very careful as to putting all our eggs in one basket. Let me I thank Madam Chair, and this was already answered by Ms. Tackler when she mentioned the issue of the basic campaign, the Dutch civil servants, that I read it in the Coho. But I would like them to even cover all the costs and everything else. since, you know, you want to really assist us to that extent. You see, and, you know, again, to repeat myself, St. Martin is dependent now, yes, but what I find is unfortunate, based on the Kingdom Charter which we agreed to, St. Martin cannot borrow unless the Dutch government gives the approval. And I'm saying, I mean, I want to see where it says in writing, maybe it can be told to me now, where it says in black and white that if St. Martin can't pay its debt, that the Dutch will pay it. I really want to see that. Because the article says that we can't borrow unless we get their permission. But it doesn't say that they'll pay it. So I don't understand it at all. And what I'm happy about, Madam Chair, is that because of the relationship between St. Martin and the Dutch government and the Netherlands, a lot of things, I'm being forced to look into things and look into the charter more and more. And I'm saying to myself, how did I miss that? How did I miss that? Article 36, I think, or 35, where it talks about Aruba, Curacao, and Netherlands should assist each other in time of need. There are no explanatory notes to say exactly what kind of help we can get. I couldn't understand it. Why was that left out? But again, that's how it goes. And then finally, Madam Chair, as I said in the beginning, the Coho, and I respect Mr. Tackling and Mr. Richardson with regards to probably look at the Coho. For me, personally, there's nothing to look at in that Coho because I don't trust. That's right, I don't trust, because I might look at a phrase or a sentence or an article and see it today, and then when I look at it 10 more times, I say, wait a minute, I didn't see that in it. And I challenge anyone to tell me that the Dutch are not very cunning and slight and know how to take one article, condemn it in one article, and then reinforce it in another article. You see, and we might miss it. And that's my problem. That's why I don't trust it. So before I get involved in that, I prefer to get rid of it. Let us see what's happening with the TAO right now, see how we can work on that. Madam Chair, Article 38.1 is working perfectly in this instance. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Ponderflat. Next on the speakers list, we have, he hasn't asked any questions. So next on the speakers list, we have MP Sarah Westcott Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady, and good afternoon, of course, and thanks to Mr. Richardson for his contribution to this discussion. I don't have much more to add, except to make the point regarding the discussion about what has changed, and going back even as far as Hurricane Louis and the rebuilding efforts following that. One thing for sure, Madam Chair Lady, is that the political climates, and I say political climates, plural, have changed dramatically, dramatically. And so if we want to achieve what it is many are saying in terms of dealing with, amending, changing, finding another instrument for the Coho objectives, we need to take that part into consideration. And I'm not looking for an answer from Mr. Richardson or Ms. Stacklin on this. It's a political issue, and it's basically to the Parliament. And we need to look at that. We need to look at that part without a doubt. And because since Hurricane Louis, and we remember very well, I'm sure Dennis does, how that reconstruction went. In fact, during the break, I was saying to some of my colleagues, there was one person who was entrusted, designated, if you wish, by the Dutch government to be the coordinator for the reconstruction. And I also mentioned, I added to that, at the end of the day, he was our biggest ally.
Yep.
He was our biggest ally. We actually stepped back, and he was boxing for us. Yep. That's a fact. Yep. And but the climate was different. And we need to take that into account. And if we really want to have the kind of discussion that I believe we must have regarding this Coho, we need to consider it also in the context and tie it to another discussion that is taking part in Parliament, and that is regarding the charter and specifically the usage of the instruments in the charter. And I agree we need to prioritize. I don't believe right now in this critical time that we're in, we should look at the entire charter and what's the best structure going forward. But some of the instruments used in the charter, we need to be able to bring this across to our colleagues on the other side of the ocean. So a lot has changed since Hurricane Luis. Now we're looking back at some of the other development aid programs for the Netherlands, Antilles, and for St. Martin that were not in a consensus kingdom law, but they worked. They worked. And the overall assessment, of course, there were some issues here and there, but the overall assessment is that we have been able to progress with these different development aid programs. And there were several of them. And I mean, we should, as a parliament, be looking at them, but in this context, it's not necessary to go and review all of them. I mean, Reda Social, the USONA, you know, all of these things. Recently, a couple of years ago, they actually had an evaluation of these type of programs. And that's why I'm able to say that the overall assessment was that they did maybe even partially, but it did meet certain objectives. So it behooves the Parliament of St. Martin to take this into consideration. We can't be talking one thing from the left side of our mouths, but talking another thing from the right side where this matter is concerned. To me, they tie in, and the political climate is crucial to the success or not of this, what we seek to embark upon. Thank you once again, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Westcott. I see that MP Westcott is the final speaker on the speakers list, and then I'd like to turn the floor over then to our Mr. Richardson for any remarks or closing remarks before we end the meeting. And then maybe, I don't know if Ms. Tackling would like to have a closing remark. No? Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Richardson?
I completely agree with MP Westcott. And during the years, we've seen different political climates in the direction of St. Martin, from the very cooperative situation that we had with after Lewis to a kind of a distrust towards the island, in which nothing could be done unless it was in a complicated bureaucratic fashion. Lewis, we did what was necessary, and it worked. A lot of changes were made. The political climate in the Netherlands has changed again. I don't know if the NADA report, as it's formulated now, is due to the political change that the present minister, Minister of State Secretary, has accepted a lot of changes that, to my surprise, after reading it, but I was a little bit out of contact, so I don't know whether it was done under the former State Secretary, Knops, or whether she herself, with her maybe new team, has influenced the content of the present NADA report. Is much better, much more receptive to us in the sense of how we look and feel about the proposals that were made. And there's some fundamental changes there. As far as one observation I would like to make as far as MP Ponteflet is concerned, the problem with Dutch laws is that and maybe all laws is the case, but they are subject to interpretation. And I think MP Westcott can confirm that. We've experienced during the 1010 negotiations that when we were attempted an interpretation on a specific article, it was considered coming back on former agreements. When the Dutch applied an interpretation on other articles, and we say this is coming back, they say no, it is interpretation of the law. So, and the problem with those things is that those who in power, who has the power at that moment, determines what it is in the end. And they were in a powerful position because we wanted our autonomy so bad that we had to make concessions. And that is maybe one of the greatest lessons we've had during that period, The world isn't as we would like it to be. The world is as you meet it. And there was a saying, I believe one of the members said, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. That is how things seem to work in real life. And with that, I think I would like to close my answer and the final statement.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I see that Ms. Stacklin would like to also have closing remarks. Ms. Stacklin?
Yeah, I can be pretty short because it was something I think that MP Westcott Williams mentioned, and also MP Emmanuel. You know, the thought of, you know, kind of why can't we do things like we did before in '95, you know, during Lewis, and the political climate. But I think important to understand is also not only the political climate. I think the world as a whole has changed. You know, we can't go to the bank the same way that we used to before. You know, I can't get loans the way my dad got loans back in the past. And so we see kind of this extra stringency, I think, across the board, not only politically. And in addition, I think looking at other countries as well, you know, the political climate, not only between St. Martin and the Netherlands, but also look at, you know, Argentina and what they went through and the IMF putting requirements on them. Look at Greece, you know, when their economy collapsed in the EU, or let's go back even an even shorter period, back to 2020, within the EU and all the negotiations that took place kind of about how they were going to fund. But the point I wanted to make there is that you see in this case where you're dealing with equal partners as opposed to St. Martin, where we're not quite on equal footing. We don't have as much weight to bring into a negotiation. And I think that's where we see kind of that discrepancy where, you know, within Europe, when Holland tried to stand up and say, we want all these conditions, and France was like, nope, not happening. And there, at least, you know, that's kind of that geopolitical strength that they have that, unfortunately, we don't have that same negotiating power. And I think the question is, you know, how can we try to negotiate for ourselves on equal footing? How do we manage to get all we can out of it? And by acknowledging the fact that we are the weaker party, that we are the party that has less weight to bring into the discussion. So I think I just wanted to end with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stacklin. I see that MP Pandeflat would like to have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Ms. Stacklin, you touched on what I was going to say practically in the sense of, you know, that we don't have the weight compared to Holland. And in my presentation that I did, I think it was yesterday before, I mentioned this, I'm going to repeat it. Because we're talking about democracy in this case, you know, larger country, more money, whatever. And this is an African saying. They said, democracy is not a majority of vote, but a matter of consensus. And based on that, I wrote an article that came out, I think, yesterday, you know, and I said, I don't want equality. I want justice. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Pandeflat. Members of Parliament, I would like to take the opportunity to thank Ms. Stacklin, Ms. Natalie Stacklin, and Mr. Dennis Richardson for your presentations, your comments, and I also like to thank the members of Parliament for their comments and questions. And with that, I would like to wish everyone a wonderful weekend and close this meeting. Meeting closed.